Welcome into the Bulang and Sons lounge. I'm here on the sofa where many of our customers explore their new watches. And today I'm going to talk about the Rolex Datejust, a subject that we talked about many times before. But today I'm going to give a little guide between the vintage and neo-vintage references to provide you with some information which one you should go for. Between the vintage and neo-vintage references, there are some differences, and most of the differences are in aesthetic and building ways. The big difference is some of the vintage references do feature a quick set date movement, but all the neo-vintage and modern references do for sure. And the biggest difference between them is the usage of the crystal. And this has a functional difference, but also an aesthetic difference. And that's the most important note to make here, because the Plexi models, which we call the vintage references, have a completely different charisma and look on your wrist than the sapphire models, which replaced them at the end of the 80s, which just have a more modern look. And really what the attractiveness here is that the Plexi crystals just look more vintage. They look also older, but they also look timeless as well. But the Plexi crystal just gives a lot of depth and warmth to the dial of the watches. Also because in the vintage references, the dials are made slightly different in the 4-digit references, which we call the 1601, 1600, 1603. Of course, you have also 4-digit references before that, but they are quite niche, so I'm not going to talk about them today. They have a step in the dial, which we call the pipe band dials. This is a very popular dial, but also a vintage look that you only see in the 4-digit references. After that, you get the 5 different references, which are made with both the Plexi and sapphire crystals. But the pipe band dials is a feature you only see in the 4-digit references. So if you're keen towards this aesthetic, well, there's not so much choice for you to make. Just go for a 4-digit references example, but just choose the bracelet and bezel type. To give you a little guide on that, watch our top 10 video in which we talk about our top 10 asked questions about the Rolex Datejust, which I give more answers to that. But today I'm only speaking about the vintage and neo-vintage facts. So if that's your aesthetic and you like the vintage look of a completely vintage Datejust, go for a 4-digit reference. But if you're looking towards a more modern look in the Plexi crystal, I would advise you to look towards the 5-digit references, like for example the 16 or 14, which I have in my hand. And the big difference between the 4 digits and 5 digits is that the 5 digits have a completely flat dial, so they lost the step in it, which makes the dial look a little bit bigger, but also gives it less depth. And these watches come in the reference 16014, 16000 and 16030, each standing for the bezel type. And this is sort of the bridge between the more modern and neo-vintage looking references and the completely vintage looking references, because it has the presence of the neo-vintage references in terms of dial and bracelets, because they feature the same bracelets and case design, dial designs, but they still feature the Plexi crystal. So that's the big difference in between them, and that's maybe, if you're choosing between them, the best option to go for. With the 5-digit references, you have many options. What's very interesting about the vintage references, both the 5 and 4 digits, is that you have a lot of dial variations, and that's very interesting, especially in combination with the Plexi crystal. Gives so much warmth to the dial. You have structured dials like tapestry dials, linen dials, but also soleil dials like silver dials, taupe dials, ghost dials, like this very rare example which I have here, which is a 1603. So with the vintage references, there's a lot of dial options to choose, and most of the dials have a more vintage character. They are not as flashy as you see them in the later references, which started with the 5-digit references like the 16234, 16200 and 16220, each standing of course for the bezel type. And the big difference here is that the watch features the sapphire crystal, and the sapphire crystal was made by Rolex to ease out the problem that the crystals scratch too much. The Plexi crystals are made from an early form of plastic which scratch easily, but also can easily be polished with a little bit of toothpaste or by a watchmaker or polisher. And the sapphire crystals are completely flat. They are made of sapphire, which is a crystal type. and really they gave the watch a more modern look, but also a more clinical look, and this completely gives the watch a total different character. So all these sapphire references, always when I had them on, even if they are from the late 80s or begin 90s, which are still old references, they just look so much more modern than the plexi references. I have a few here. You can see one with a blue dial, one with a cream dial. So also the sapphire references feature different type of dials. Like for example the cream dial, which I have here, of which the white turned into cream color over time. This is something you won't see on the vintage references because they didn't make these dials back then. Or here the computer dial or Jubilee dial, which have a Rolex print all over the dial, which is just something you don't see in the complete vintage references, but in the neo vintage references. So if you're looking towards some type of dial variations, just look which reference features this dial. And something you see more often with the sapphire references, which is also seen in the vintage references, are stone dials or mother of pearl dials like the one I have here. So in dial variations, there is a lot of choice between them. But what would be my advice, especially for you? Well, look at your lifestyle. Look at your aesthetic, which you love, and then make your choice. And go for the best example, that's the most important, but then as well, you're here at Bulang and Sons at the completely right place because we only have the nicest ones. And just look at what attracts you, that's the most important here, and looks to what suits your lifestyle, like I already said, because the sapphire references just feel more modern, more sturdy. You can really wear the vintage references on a daily basis. I have over the last years. I have never experienced them as fragile or anything. They are made like tanks. They are made to enjoy for a lifetime. So don't worry about that. But if you may be a younger person, like for example me, your 20s or 30s, maybe you're more attracted to the sapphire references because they just look more modern. They look more contemporary and maybe suit your lifestyle better. And if you're really keen on those vintage references, just go for a plexi model. That's important here. So my advice would be to go for a watch that suits your lifestyle, suits your aesthetic, and in the best condition. And we are really happy to help you find that watch and make it happen for you. Get your grail here at our lounge or ship it to you worldwide, which we do every day. We still rely on a 14-day return policy. So don't worry about that. We will help you find your grail and make your choice. Do you want the neo vintage or do you want the vintage reference? Choice is up to you. So enjoy your watch fun, enjoy your watch hunt. Contact us for more information and we will help you to find your dream watch.